The processing clerk's hand closed around Essie's arm hard enough to leave marks, and Essie did not make a sound. She had learned, in the 9 days since the transport bay doors had sealed behind her, that sound was currency in the Vethin intake facility, and she could not afford to spend it. The children who cried were separated first. The children who screamed were separated faster. The children who stayed quiet were left in the holding bay longest, which was cold, and the floor grating cut into bare feet. But the holding bay had a window that faced the port, and through that window Essie could see the market stalls lighting up at dawn, and dawn was the only beautiful thing left. Batch 9 minor 7, the clerk said, reading from a tablet without looking at her. Species, Deshani. Age equivalent, juvenile. No familial claim registered. No sponsor. No educational placement. Status, unclaimed. Assignment, labor redistribution pool, northern mineral shelf effective. I can read, Essie said. The clerk's hand tightened. 2 of his fingers were mechanical, chrome joints that clicked when they flexed, and they dug into the soft skin above her elbow with a precision that suggested practice. Minors do not speak during processing. Essie closed her mouth. She locked her jaw and held her breath and stared at the far wall where someone had scratched a mark into the metal paneling. A small, crude glyph that might have been a word in a language she did not know, or might have been nothing at all. She stared at it until the clerk released her arm and moved to the next child in line, a boy younger than her with blue-white skin and eyes that had stopped tracking anything hours ago. The holding bay held 41 children. Essie had counted them. She counted everything now, the rivets in the ceiling panels, the seconds between guard rotations, the number of steps from the bay door to the processing desk, the calories in the ration bar they had been given at intake. 1 bar, 9 days ago. She had eaten half and saved the other half in the inner pocket of her robe, and when hunger made her hands shake she would reach into the pocket and touch the wrapper and tell herself the other half was there. It was real. It was waiting. She had eaten it on day 4. The wrapper was still in her pocket. She touched it now, a reflex, and her fingers found the familiar crinkle of foil, and for one fraction of a second, her body believed the lie her mind was telling, that there was still food, still something held back, still a reserve. Then the moment passed, and the emptiness in her stomach reasserted itself with the dull, grinding authority of a thing that had been in charge for a long time and intended to stay. Through the window, the market was waking. She could see the stall frames going up, metal poles slotted into stone sockets along the port promenade, canvas stretched between them, heat lamps clicking on to warm the display surfaces. On Tessavane, the port market ran from dawn to midday, and it sold everything. Machine parts, textiles, dried protein bricks, live animals in suspension crates, data sticks, medicine, tools. She had watched it every morning through the processing window. She had memorized the layout. Protein vendor in the 3rd row, steam rising from the heating vat at 06:40 local, the smell reaching the intake facility by 06:55 if the wind came from the south. Today the wind came from the south. The smell hit her at 06:52, 3 minutes early. Hot broth, rendered animal fat and salt in some kind of grain she did not recognize. It threaded through the ventilation grating and filled the holding bay, and 41 children lifted their heads at the same instant, nostrils flaring, ears rotating, a synchronized biological response to the presence of food that no amount of processing facility discipline could suppress. Essie's stomach cramped so hard she bent forward. She pressed her fists against her abdomen and breathed through her teeth and did not make a sound. The guard at the bay door shifted his weight. He was new, she had cataloged all the guards, and this one had been on rotation for only 2 days. He was young, humanoid but not human, with mottled green-brown skin and a jaw structure that suggested Chelseaa heritage. He carried his stun baton the way new guards did, too high on his belt, too easy to grab if you were fast enough. She was fast enough. She had not planned it. That was the truth she would tell herself later, when the story required a version that made sense. She had not sat in the holding bay for 9 days calculating angles and guard rotations and the distance to the ventilation shaft. She had not measured the guard's reach or timed the interval between the processing clerk's rounds. She had simply stood up, walked to the bay door, said, "I need to use the sanitation unit." And when the guard turned to key the door panel, she had ducked under his arm, taken 3 steps into the corridor, found the service hatch she had noticed on day 1, and dropped through it into a maintenance crawlspace that smelled like engine coolant and rust. She ran. The crawlspace was narrow enough that her shoulders brushed both walls and low enough that she moved in a crouch that would have been painful if she had been paying attention to pain. She was not paying attention to pain. She was paying attention to direction south, toward the market, toward the smell of broth, and to the sound behind her, which was the guard's boots hitting the corridor floor, and his voice shouting a code she did not recognize into his comm unit. She found the exterior vent by feel, a square of gray light at the end of the crawlspace, covered by a grate held in place with corroded bolts that gave way when she kicked them. The grate swung open. Morning air hit her face, dry and warm and carrying the smell of food, and she dropped 2 meters to the ground, landed on packed dirt, stumbled, caught herself on a cargo crate, and ran into the market crowd. The Tessavain Port Market at dawn was a controlled chaos of species and commerce. Stalls stretched in rows along the promenade, narrow aisles between them packed with traders, dock workers, off-duty crew from the freighters moored at the orbital tether, local residents doing morning supply runs. Essie threaded between them like water through grating. She was small, chest-high to a human adult, waist-high to a Drenathi, barely visible in the forest of legs and torsos that filled the aisles. Her skin was lavender gray, her hair white and cropped close to her skull in the style the intake facility barber had imposed on every child regardless of species, and her ears wide, pointed, tipped with silver fur, rotated constantly, tracking the sounds behind her, sorting the market noise for the specific frequency of pursuit. She heard it, 2 sets of boots moving fast, a burst of calm chatter in the clipped dialect the facility guards used. They were in the market. They were close. She turned left, then right, then left again, moving without pattern through the stall rows. Her bare feet slapped on cobblestone worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. She passed a textile stall, a tool vendor, a woman selling suspension crate animals who shouted something at her about watching where she was going. She passed a row of food stalls, and the smell hit her so hard that her vision blurred, and her legs almost buckled, and she grabbed the edge of a stall counter to keep herself upright and found herself staring at a vat of soup. It was enormous. Copper-walled, heat-blackened at the base, steam rising from a surface of amber liquid in which pieces of grain and vegetable and rendered protein floated in slow rotation. The vat sat on a grated burner behind a counter made of reclaimed ship plating, and behind the counter stood a human woman. The woman was not young and not old. She had broad shoulders and thick forearms and hands that were scarred across the knuckles in the way that spoke of decades of kitchen work, burns and cuts, and the slow erosion of skin that comes from handling hot metal every day. Her hair was dark, shot through with gray, pulled back from her face in a knot that was functional rather than decorative. She wore an apron over a plain thermal shirt, and the apron was stained with the day's work. Broth splatter, grain dust, a smear of something orange near the pocket. Her face was weathered, lined at the corners of her eyes and mouth, and her eyes were brown and steady and looking directly at Essie. "You're bleeding," the woman said. Essie looked down. Her right foot had a cut across the ball, opened by a sharp edge on the cobblestone. She had not felt it. She felt it now, a hot line of pain that spiked when she put weight on it, and the awareness of pain opened a door to all the other sensations she had been suppressing. The hunger, the exhaustion, the bruises on her arm where the clerk's chrome fingers had gripped, the raw skin on her knees from the crawlspace, The fact that she had not slept properly in 9 days and her body was shaking, and the world was starting to tilt sideways in a way that suggested she was about to fall down. She did not fall down. She locked her knees and gripped the counter and looked at the woman and said, "I can work." It was the only phrase she had that might be worth something. In the intake facility, children who could work were fed. Children who could not work were not. The woman studied her for 3 seconds. Essie counted them. Then the woman reached under the counter, pulled out a wooden stool, and set it inside the stall behind the serving line. "Sit." "I said I can work." "I heard you. Sit down before you fall down." Essie sat. Her legs folded under her like a structure whose supports had been removed, and she landed on the stool with a gracelessness that would have embarrassed her if she had enough energy left for embarrassment. The woman was already moving, reaching for a bowl, a ladle, filling the bowl from the vat with practiced efficiency. She set it on the counter in front of Essie. The steam rose and hit Essie's face, and the smell was so immediate, so present, so overwhelmingly real that something in her chest cracked open, and she had to press her lips together very hard to keep the sound inside. "Eat slowly," the woman said. "You'll get sick if you rush it." Essie picked up the spoon. Her hand trembled. She took a sip of broth and the warmth spread through her mouth and down her throat and into her stomach, where it met the emptiness and began, carefully, to fill it. The woman watched her for a moment, then turned back to the vat. A dock worker had arrived at the counter, a large Drenathi male with thermal paste smeared on his forehead, and the woman served him with the same efficient movements: bowl, ladle, fill, slide, while exchanging the kind of brief, comfortable words that people exchange when they have been doing business with each other for years. Essie ate. She ate slowly, as instructed, and the discipline required to do so, to lift the spoon at measured intervals, to chew the grain pieces before swallowing, to not tip the bowl to her mouth and drink, was the hardest thing she had done since leaving the holding bay. Her body wanted to devour. Her body wanted to fold itself around the bowl and consume everything and then lick the ceramic and then eat the ceramic. She did not let it. She ate slowly, and with each spoonful the shaking in her hands decreased by a fraction, and the tilt of the world leveled by a degree, and the raw, scraped-out feeling in her chest began to ease. She was halfway through the bowl when the guards entered the market row. There were 3 of them now, the young Chelsea guard from the bay door and 2 others, both human, both wearing the gray and yellow uniform of the Vethin Intake Facilities Retrieval Division. They moved down the aisle in a loose formation, scanning stall interiors, checking under counters. One of them carried a handheld scanner, a species tracking device that picked up biological signatures. The Chelsea guard's face was red with the particular embarrassment of someone who had lost a child on his watch and was now performing the consequences. Essie's ears flattened against her skull. Her hand stopped moving. The spoon hovered above the bowl, perfectly still, and every muscle in her body locked into the motionless rigidity that her species adopted in the presence of predators. An evolutionary response designed for a world where stillness meant survival. The woman noticed. She did not look at the guards. She did not look at Essie. She continued ladling soup for the Drenathi dock worker, collected his payment chit, thanked him, wiped the counter with a cloth. Then she moved to the back of the stall, picked up a crate of dried grain, and set it on the ground next to Essie's stool. "When they come past," the woman said, her voice low and even, "you're going to be sorting grain. You work here. You've been working here since dawn. Your name is whatever you want it to be. Nod if you understand." Essie nodded. The woman placed a second crate beside the first, this one empty. "Sort the dark kernels from the light ones. It doesn't matter how, just look busy." Essie set down the bowl. She slid off the stool to the ground, pulled the crate between her knees and began sorting grain. Her hands moved with the mechanical precision the intake facility had trained into her, efficient, rhythmic, purposeful. She was a child sorting grain in a market stall. She had been doing it since dawn. Her name was whatever she wanted it to be. The guards reached the food stalls. The one with the scanner swept it across the row, a wide arc that covered 8 stalls in a single pass. The device chirped. The guard checked the readout, frowned, adjusted a setting, and swept again. "Morning," the woman said to them, the way she said morning to every customer. "Soup's on. 4 credits a bowl, 2 for station workers." The Chelsea guard looked at her, then at the stall interior. His eyes passed over the vats, the counter, the supplies stacked along the back wall. His gaze reached Essie and stopped. Essie sorted grain. She did not look up, she did not freeze. She picked up dark kernels and placed them in the empty crate with the steady, unthinking rhythm of a child who had been doing this task for hours and was bored by it. "That one yours?" the guard asked. "My granddaughter," the woman said, "helping out before school." She turned to Essie. "Essie, say good morning to the officers." The use of her real name startled her so badly that she almost looked up. She caught herself. She kept her hands moving. "Good morning," she said, and her voice came out flat and bored and exactly right. The guard with the scanner checked his readout again. Essie felt the scan pass over her, a faint electromagnetic tingle across her skin that made her ears want to rotate. She kept them still. The scanner chirped. "Got a Deshenny reading," the guard said to the Chelsea. "In a market," the other human guard said. "There's 300 species in a 2-block radius. Every stall's going to flag something." The Chelsea guard looked at Essie. She could feel his attention like a physical weight on the back of her neck. She picked up a dark kernel. She placed it in the crate. She picked up another. "Come on," the second human guard said. "She's been in the row for an hour at least. Look at the sort pile. Our runner went through 20 minutes ago. Let's check the docking arm." The Chelsea guard hesitated. Then he turned, and the 3 of them moved down the row, and Essie kept sorting grain for another 60 seconds before her hands began to shake. The woman waited until the guards turned the corner. Then she crouched beside Essie, lowering herself slowly, the way people with bad knees do it, one hand bracing on the counter edge, until she was at Essie's eye level. "That foot needs cleaning," she said, "and you're going to finish that soup, and then we're going to have a conversation about what happens next." "I can work," Essie said again, because it was the only contract she knew how to offer. "I know you can," the woman said. "That's not what I asked." Her name was Bridget Core, and she had been running the soup stall at the Tessavain Port Market for 11 years. She told Essie this while cleaning the cut on her foot with an antiseptic kit she kept under the counter. The kit was well stocked and organized with the efficiency of someone who used it often. Dock workers burned themselves on hot surfaces. Children cut their feet on cobblestone. The occasional bar fight spilled into the market row, and someone needed patching up. Bridget cleaned wounds the way she served soup, without fuss, with steady hands, with a competence so practiced it looked like indifference. "I was a ship's cook before this," she said, wrapping a strip of clean gauze around Essie's foot. 22 years on freight haulers, long-range runs, deep space, skeleton crews. You learn to feed people with whatever's on hand and make it taste like something. You learn to keep a galley running when the power cuts out and the heating coils go bad. And the supply manifest says you've got 900 calories per person per day, and not a gram more. She tied off the gauze, checked it, adjusted it. "I retired here because the climate's decent, the rent's cheap, and the port brings enough traffic to keep a food stall profitable. I make soup. I sell soup. Some days I make enough to cover costs. Most days I don't. It's not a career. It's what I do instead of nothing." Essie listened. She ate her soup, the second bowl, which Bridget had filled without asking, and listened with the focused attention of someone cataloging every piece of information for potential survival value. Bridget Core, human female, approximately 60 standard years, retired freight cook, 11-year resident, established market presence, no visible family. The soup stall was registered under a commercial license. Essie could see the permit posted on the back wall, a laminated card with a holographic seal from the Tessavain Port Authority. "The intake facility," Cass said. "They'll search again." "Probably." The scanner read my biosignature. "They know I was in this row. They know a Deshani was in this row. This port processes 18,000 beings per day. There are Deshani traders, Deshani dock workers, Deshani crew on half the freighters at the tether. One reading in a market doesn't prove anything. The retrieval agents are more thorough than the guards." Bridget paused. She looked at Essie, really looked, the way she had looked when Essie had first grabbed the counter, a measuring gaze that assessed not what Essie was saying but what she was made of. "Tell me about these retrieval agents." Essie told her. She told her about the Seathrani mercantile enforcers who operated under commercial license, who tracked unclaimed miners through port systems and transit records, who had access to species identification databases and biosignature archives that made the handheld scanner look like a children's toy. She told her about the Tesserain Reclamation Compact, which classified orphan children without familial claims as unclaimed assets of the state and authorized their redistribution into labor programs. She told her about the Northern Mineral Shelf, where the labor programs operated: deep shaft extraction, 16-hour shifts, atmospheric toxicity that reduced Deshani lung function by 40% within 2 years of exposure. She told it flatly, without emotion, in the precise syntax the processing facility had taught her to use when providing information to authorities. She had learned that emotion made adults uncomfortable, and uncomfortable adults made decisions faster, and fast decisions were usually bad for the child. Bridget listened. Her face did not change. When Essie finished, Bridget stood up, walked to the front of the stall, and began serving the morning rush as if nothing had happened. Dock workers, traders, a group of off-duty shuttle pilots who argued about fuel prices while they ate. Bridget served them all with the same steady hands and the same brief, professional manner, and Essie sat on her stool behind the counter and sorted grain, and understood that she was being evaluated. At 09:30, the morning rush ended. Bridget wiped down the counter, checked the VAT levels, adjusted the burner temperature. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a comm unit, old, scuffed, the kind of device that had been repaired so many times it was more replacement parts than original hardware. "I'm going to make a call," she said. "Stay behind the counter." She stepped to the back of the stall out of earshot and spoke into the comm for 4 minutes. Essie counted. When Bridget returned, her expression had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that a casual observer would notice, but Essie had spent 9 days in a holding bay learning to read the micro-expressions of the people who controlled her fate, and she could see the change. Bridget's jaw was set differently. Her shoulders had squared. There was something in her eyes that had not been there before, a quality that Essie did not have a word for in her own language, but that she recognized the way prey recognizes a change in the weather. It was the look of a person who had made a decision. "There's a Colonial Affairs office on the upper promenade," Bridget said. "They handle immigration disputes, residency claims, labor contract challenges. A man named Davin Reese runs the desk. He's slow and he's a bureaucrat, but he's honest, and he knows the charter law that governs minor status protections in the Tessavain Port District." "The Reclamation Compact overrides local charter," Essie said. "It does, in most jurisdictions, but Tessavain's charter has a clause, Article 14, Section 3, that grants temporary protected status to any minor physically present within the Port District who is under the active care of a registered resident. Protected status suspends external labor claims for 90 days while Colonial Affairs reviews the case." Essie stared at her. "I've been in this port for 9 days. No one mentioned that clause. No one at the intake facility would. It costs them a labor unit." Bridget folded the comm back into her apron. Protected status requires two things: proof that the minor is under the active care of a registered resident, and a signed affidavit from the resident accepting provisional guardianship. You've known about this clause. I've used this clause 3 times in 11 years, 2 Chelsea siblings and a Drenathi boy. A pause. All 3 are still in the Port District. The Chelsea run a repair shop on the lower level. The Drenathi is an apprentice mechanic on a freight crew. Something shifted inside Essie's chest, a tectonic movement, slow and deep, in a place she had assumed was solid ground. She had built her survival on the assumption that help was transactional. You worked, you were fed. You provided value, you were kept. The processing facility ran on this logic. The reclamation compact was this logic made law. Every adult she had encountered since her family's compound had burned operated on some version of this exchange. Bridget was offering something that did not fit the equation. Why? Essie asked. Bridget looked at her for a long time. The market noise filled the silence, traders calling prices, a cargo loader beeping as it reversed, the hiss of steam from a neighboring stall. Bridget's hands were resting on the counter, scarred and rough and steady. "Because the soup is better than the mine's," she said. "And because I'm a cook, not a philosopher, and the only thing I know how to do when a hungry child sits down at my counter is feed them." It was not a grand statement. It was not a speech about justice or compassion or the fundamental rights of sentient beings. It was a cook's answer, practical, grounded, stripped of everything except the truth. Essie looked at the bowl in front of her. It was empty. She had not noticed finishing it. Will the retrieval agents honor the protected status? They have to, for 90 days. After that, Colonial Affairs either grants a permanent residency waiver or the claim reverts to the compact. Bridget's eyes were steady. 90 days is a long time. A lot can happen in 90 days. What happens to you? If you sign the affidavit and the compact sends enforcement. Then I have a conversation with enforcement about the terms of my commercial license and the provisions of Article 14, and the fact that I've been a registered resident of this port for 11 years, and I pay my taxes and I know every dock worker, shuttle pilot, and cargo handler in this district by name, and they all eat my soup. Essie understood. It was not a legal argument. It was a practical one. Bridget Core was not powerful, not wealthy, not connected. She was something more useful, embedded. She was the person who fed the port, and the port knew it, and that knowledge had a weight that no mercantile enforcement license could easily move. "I'll need to go to Colonial Affairs," Essie said, "in person." "With you?" "After lunch rush, Davin keeps late hours." Bridget handed her a clean cloth. "In the meantime, those grain crates aren't going to sort themselves." The lunch rush was harder than the morning. The stall's customer base shifted, fewer dock workers, more station crew, a cluster of transit passengers waiting for outbound shuttles who wanted food fast and had opinions about portion sizes. Bridget worked the front counter and Essie worked the back, washing bowls in the sanitization basin, refilling grain stores from the bulk containers, monitoring the burner temperature on the secondary vat that Bridget had started at 10:00 for the afternoon protein stew. Essie discovered that she was, in fact, good at this. Her hands were steady despite the hunger still gnawing at her edges. Her attention to detail, the same attention that had counted rivets and guard rotations, translated efficiently into kitchen logistics. She noticed when the grain bin dropped below the refill threshold. She tracked the sanitization cycle times. She identified the moment when the secondary vat's temperature rose 2 degrees above optimal and adjusted the burner before Bridget had to tell her. "You've done this before," Bridget said, not quite a question. "My family operated a community kitchen on Deshar before the burning." Essie scrubbed a bowl and placed it in the drying rack. "I helped in the kitchen from the time I could reach the counter. My mother said I had a logistics mind." Your mother was right. It was a small thing, 3 words, spoken without emphasis, dropped into the noise of the lunch rush the way a stone drops into a current. But Essie felt it land. Not in her stomach, where the soup had landed, but higher, in the place behind her sternum where things that mattered lived. The place that had been scraped hollow by 9 days in a processing facility, and 9 days before that in a refugee transport, and an uncounted number of days before that in which everything she had known had been reduced to ash and coordinates. Your mother was right. Present tense to describe a dead woman's judgment, as if the judgment still held, as if the woman who had made it still had authority over the world, as if the fact of her death did not cancel the fact of her wisdom. Essie scrubbed another bowl. She did not make a sound. At 14:00, the lunch rush thinned. Bridget began the shutdown sequence for the morning vat, a series of steps that involved draining residual broth, scrubbing the copper interior with a long-handled brush, running the sanitization cycle, and checking the heating coils for carbon buildup. She moved through the process with the efficiency of 11 years' practice, and Essie watched and cataloged and filed each step in the part of her mind that had been building a survival database since the day her world ended. The retrieval agents arrived at 14:22. There were 2 of them, and they were not the facility guards. These were Thrani, tall, narrow-framed, with skin the color of old bronze and eyes that were entirely black. No iris, no white, just polished obsidian surfaces that reflected the market light like mirrors. They wore identical dark coats over close-fitted utility suits, and they moved through the market with the unhurried precision of professionals who had done this many times, and had learned that haste was unnecessary, because they always found what they were looking for. Essie's body reacted before her mind did, every muscle locked, her ears flattened, her breathing stopped. She was behind the counter, partially hidden by the stacked crates and the bulk of the secondary vat, but hiding was not a strategy against Thrani. The Thrani did not use handheld scanners. They used their own senses, a species-specific capacity for biosignature detection that operated through pheromone tracking and electromagnetic resonance, a biological scanner built into their skulls that no technology could replicate or jam. They would find her. The only question was how long it took. Bridget was at the front counter wiping it down. She saw the agents. She continued wiping. The first Thrani reached the stall. He was the taller of the 2, his coat buttoned to the throat, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of authority that the Thrani adopted when they wanted you to understand that they were being patient, and that patience was a choice they could revoke. Bridget Kaur, he said, registered proprietor, stall 17, Tessavane Port Market. That's me. Bridget folded the cloth and set it on the counter. Soup's off for the day. I can do broth if you want it. We are not here for soup. He did not smile. The Thrani did not smile. We are executing a recovery order under the Tessarene Reclamation Compact, authorization code 7741. We are seeking a juvenile Deshani female, unclaimed, who departed the Vethin intake facility this morning without authorization. Our tracking indicates she entered this market row approximately 8 hours ago. Lot of people come through this row, Bridget said. Our tracking is more specific than a lot of people. The second Thrani had moved to the side of the stall. His black eyes swept the interior, the vats, the crates, the supplies. His gaze reached Essie and stopped, and Essie felt the recognition like a door closing. The juvenile is behind your counter, the first Thrani said. We will take custody now. Bridget did not move. She stood at the counter with her scarred hands resting on the surface and her weight settled, and her eyes fixed on the Thrani agent with an expression that was not aggressive, not defiant, not emotional. It was the expression of a woman who had spent 22 years feeding crews on freight haulers, where the power cut out, and the supplies ran short, and someone had to make decisions about who ate and who didn't, and she had always been the one making those decisions, and she had never once made the wrong one. Article 14, Section 3 of the Tessavain Port District Charter, Bridget said. Temporary protected status for any minor physically present within the port district who is under the active care of a registered resident. The first Seathrani's expression did not change. The Reclamation Compact supersedes local charter. In most jurisdictions, not in charter sovereign port districts with active care provisions, Tessavain's charter predates the compact by 40 years. I filed a provisional guardianship affidavit with Colonial Affairs as of, she checked the time display on her comm, 12 minutes ago. Davin Reese is processing it now. The affidavit triggers a 90-day suspension of all external claims while the case is reviewed. She had made the call while Essie was washing bowls. She had filed the paperwork during the lunch rush, between serving shuttle pilots and refilling grain stores, without saying a word about it. The second Seathrani stepped closer to the counter. A provisional affidavit does not constitute finalized protected status until Colonial Affairs stamps the confirmation. Check your system, Bridget said. Davin's fast when I ask him to be. The first Seathrani pulled a slim device from his coat pocket. He consulted it. His black eyes moved across the readout, and Essie watched a very small, very precise shift occur in his posture, a tightening of the shoulders, a fractional adjustment of weight from one foot to the other. She had spent 9 days reading the micro-expressions of people who controlled her fate, and she knew what she was seeing. He had found the confirmation. 90 days, the first Seathrani said. The compact will file a formal challenge with Colonial Affairs. If the challenge is upheld, the recovery order reinstates. Then it reinstates, Bridget said. In 90 days. Until then, she's under my care and she stays behind my counter. The Seathrani looked at Essie. His black mirror eyes reflected her own face back at her. Small, lavender gray, ears pressed flat, eyes wide. Sitting on an overturned crate with a scrub brush in one hand, and a look on her face that she could not name and did not try to. 90 days, he said again, and the word was not a concession. It was a deadline. They left. They moved back down the market row with the same unhurried precision, and the market noise filled the space they had occupied, and the afternoon light shifted, and Essie sat behind the counter and held the scrub brush and waited for her hands to stop shaking. It took 4 minutes, she counted. Bridget did not say it's okay, or they're gone, or any of the things that adults said to children when they wanted to make a frightening thing smaller. She reached under the counter, pulled out the med kit, and set a bottle of water and a protein bar beside Essie's stool. Eat, she said. Then help me close up. We've got to walk to Colonial Affairs and Davin will want to see you in person. The walk to Colonial Affairs took 14 minutes. Essie counted every step, 712, up a stone ramp to the upper promenade, through a corridor lined with administrative offices, to a door marked with a plain sign that read Colonial AFFAIRS, TESSIVANE Port District in 3 languages. Davin Reese was a thin man with spectacles and a desk covered in data chips. He looked at Essie over the top of his spectacles with the expression of someone who had processed a lot of paperwork in his career and had developed the ability to see the person behind the paperwork without losing the thread of the procedure. Desheni Juvenile, provisional guardianship filed under Article 14.3, he said. Your name? Essie. Family name? I don't have one anymore. Davin looked at Bridget. Bridget looked back. Something passed between them, a communication that operated on the frequency of people who had done this before and did not need to explain to each other what was happening or why. Right, Davin said. He pulled a form from a drawer. We'll use the guardian's surname for the filing. Standard procedure for unaccompanied minors without registered family names. He wrote something on the form. Essie Core. That work. Essie looked at Bridget. Bridget was looking at the form, her expression neutral, her scarred hands resting on her thighs. She did not tell Essie what to say. She did not nod or shake her head or offer any signal of preference. She waited. "Yes," Essie said, "that works." The form had 17 sections. Davin walked them through each one. Guardian identification, minor identification, residential address, commercial license verification, medical status, educational plan. Bridget answered the adult questions, and Essie answered the child questions, and Davin filled in the bureaucratic gaps. And by the time they reached section 17, Guardian Statement of Intent, the light coming through the office window had shifted from afternoon gold to late-day amber. "Last one," Davin said. "Standard language. I, the undersigned, affirm that I accept provisional guardianship of the above-named minor and will provide care, shelter, nutrition, and access to education for the duration of the protected status period, and that I do so voluntarily and without external coercion. Sign and date." Bridget took the pen. She signed her name in a hand that was steady and unhesitating, and written in the plain, functional script of a person who signed commercial invoices and supply manifests and delivery receipts every day, and treated her own signature as a tool rather than a performance. Davin stamped the form. The holographic seal activated a pulse of blue light that spread across the document and settled into the laminate. He filed the original in a drawer and handed Bridget the copy. 90 days, he said. "I'll schedule the review hearing for day 80. That gives me time to build the residency case. Bring the girl. Bring documentation of care, educational records, medical checkups, proof of nutrition and housing. The more paper, the better." "Understood." "And Bridget," Davin took off his spectacles and cleaned them on his shirt, a gesture that seemed to signal the transition from bureaucrat to person. "The Seathrani will push. They always push. The compact doesn't like losing units. If they escalate beyond commercial enforcement, if they bring military-grade pressure, call me. Day or night. I've got contacts in the district governor's office who take Article 14 seriously." Bridget nodded. She folded the form and put it in her apron pocket next to the comm unit. They walked back to the market in the late daylight. The stalls were closing, canvas coming down, heat lamps clicking off, the last traders packing unsold inventory into transport crates. The cobblestone was warm under Essie's bandaged foot. The air smelled of cooling metal and the ghost of broth, and the dry, mineral scent of the canyon that flanked the port district on 3 sides. "I don't understand," Essie said. "What don't you understand?" "The cost. You've signed a legal document accepting responsibility for my care for 90 days. You operate a marginally profitable soup stall. Adding a dependent increases your food expenditure, your housing costs, your liability exposure. If the Seathrani escalate, you face potential enforcement action against your commercial license. The rational calculation." "Stop." Essie stopped. Bridget had stopped walking. She stood on the cobblestone in the amber light with the folded form in her apron and her scarred hands at her sides, and she looked at Essie with an expression that was not pity, not tenderness, not the soft-eyed concern that adults directed at orphan children when they wanted to demonstrate their own goodness. It was something harder than that, and warmer, and Essie did not have a word for it. "You're 10, Bridget said. "Maybe 11. You've been running cost-benefit analyses on your own survival since the day you lost your family, and you've been doing it well enough to get here, and I'm not going to tell you to stop because that skill kept you alive and it matters. But you're sitting in my stall eating my soup, and the question isn't whether it's rational. The question is whether you want to stay." The market was quiet. The canyon wind moved through the empty stall rows, carrying dust and the last warmth of the day. Somewhere on the lower level, a cargo loader beeped. A dock worker laughed. The ordinary sounds of a port doing its ordinary work at the end of an ordinary day. "I want to stay," Essie said. "Then you stay." They walked the rest of the way in silence. Bridget's apartment was above the stall, a small space, clean, organized with the efficient use of limited square footage that Essie recognized from ship berths and refugee quarters. One room served as living area and kitchen. A second room held a bed, a storage unit, and a window facing the canyon. Bridget opened the storage unit and pulled out a folding cot, a blanket, and a pillow. "The cot's not great," she said. "I'll get a proper bed ordered from the supply depot tomorrow." Essie touched the blanket. It was worn, soft from years of washing, and warm in a way that had nothing to do with thermal insulation, and everything to do with the fact that someone had taken it from storage and unfolded it and placed it on a cot and said, without saying, "This is where you sleep now." "I know how to maintain a commercial kitchen," Essie said. "I can manage inventory, track supply levels, run the sanitization cycle, and adjust burner calibrations for 3 types of heating coil. I learn quickly. I will be useful." "I don't doubt it. I'm telling you so you know the arrangement is not one-directional. I am not a cost. I am a contribution." Bridget looked at her. The apartment was dim. The lighting panel was set to evening mode, a warm amber glow that softened the hard edges of the furniture and the harder edges of the 2 people standing in it. Bridget's face was half in shadow and half in light, and her expression was the expression of a woman who was being handed a contract by a child who had learned, too young, that love was something you earned with labor. "Kid," she said, "you don't have to earn the cot." Essie stood very still. The blanket was in her hands. The apartment smelled like broth and metal cleaner and the dry canyon air that came through the window. Outside, the market was dark, the stalls closed, the cobblestone cooling under a sky that held more stars than she could count even though she had tried. She did not make a sound, but something behind her sternum shifted again, that tectonic movement, deep and slow, and this time it did not feel like ground giving way. It felt like ground being built. The days organized themselves around the stall. Essie woke at 05:00, the same time Bridget woke, and they walked downstairs in the gray pre-dawn light to begin the morning prep. Vat cleaning, burner ignition, grain soaking, protein stock preparation. Bridget worked in a specific sequence that she had developed over 11 years, and that she explained to Essie without condescension. "This is why the grain soaks for 40 minutes and not 30. This is why the burner starts at low heat and ramps. This is why the first batch of stock uses bone rather than extract." Essie absorbed it. She had a logistics mind, her mother had been right about that, and the stall's operations mapped neatly onto the frameworks she already carried. Inventory tracking, supply chain management, thermal regulation, waste minimization. Within 3 days, she could run the morning prep sequence independently. Within a week, she could manage the sanitization cycle, calibrate the burner to within half a degree, and estimate remaining stock levels by weight and volume without checking the manifest. "You're fast," Bridget said on day 8, watching Essie adjust the secondary vat's temperature without being asked. "My mother trained me." "She trained you well." Day 12, Bridget enrolled Essie in the Port District's educational program, a modular system run by a retired academic named Thorne who held classes in a converted storage unit on the upper promenade. Thorne was tall, dry-humored, and unimpressed by either bureaucratic authority or small children, which made him an excellent teacher. His class had 9 students, 6 human, 2 Chelsea, and now 1 Deshany, and his curriculum covered mathematics, language, basic science, and what he called navigational ethics, which appeared to be a course in how to make decisions when every option was bad. Day 19, the Seathrani returned. Not the same 2 agents, these were different, more senior, their coats better tailored, their manner more polished. They came to the stall at mid-morning when the rush was at its peak, and they asked to see the provisional guardianship documentation. Bridget produced it. They examined it. They noted the colonial affairs stamp, the holographic seal, the signed affidavit. The compact will file for expedited review, the senior agent said. File whatever you want, Bridget said. Article 14 doesn't care about your filing schedule. 90 days is 90 days. They left. The dock workers at the counter watched them go and then turned back to their soup, and one of them, a large Drenathi woman named Kess who had been eating at Bridget's stall for 7 years, said, "You need anything, Bridget, you let me know. I need you to tell your crew to stop putting their feet on my counter." Anything except that. Day 26. Essie's nightmares stopped. She did not announce this. She simply noticed one morning that she had slept through the night without waking in the dark, with her hands pressed against the cot frame, and her ears rotating wildly and her heart rate spiking to a frequency that her species should not sustain. She noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound you have been hearing for so long that it became background. Not with relief exactly, but with a cautious, tentative recognition that something had changed. She told Bridget. Not directly, she did not walk up to Bridget and say, "My nightmares have stopped," she said at breakfast. "I slept well," and Bridget looked at her and nodded and said, "Good," and that was the entire conversation, and it was enough. Day 34. Essie made soup. Not the morning broth, that was Bridget's recipe, calibrated over 11 years and adjusted to the port's specific water mineral content and the particular preferences of the dockworker clientele. Essie made a different soup, a Deshani recipe that her mother had taught her. A thin, clear broth flavored with a dried herb that grew in the highlands of Deshar, with shredded root vegetables and tiny grain dumplings that you shaped between your palms and dropped into the boiling liquid one by one. She made it at the stall in the secondary vat during the slow hour between lunch and close. Bridget watched from the counter, arms folded, saying nothing. Essie shaped the dumplings with her hands and dropped them into the broth, and each one sank and then rose, and the smell that filled the stall was not the port market smell. It was older and farther, and it carried in its steam the memory of a kitchen on a world that no longer existed. She served it to Bridget in one of the standard bowls. Bridget tasted it. Her face did not change. Cooks do not perform reactions to food. They assess it, but something in her eyes shifted, a quality of attention that said the soup had reached her in a place that food does not usually reach. "That's good," Bridget said. "My mother's recipe. Put it on the menu." Day 41. A message arrived at the stall. Official stationery, Colonial Affairs seal. The Tessaran Reclamation Compact had filed for expedited review of the provisional guardianship. A hearing had been scheduled for day 60, 30 days ahead of the original timeline. Davin Reese called Bridget that evening. Essie could hear only Bridget's side of the conversation, short, direct. A series of questions followed by a series of nods. When Bridget hung up, she sat at the kitchen table in their apartment and spread the message out and looked at it for a long time. "They're pushing," Essie said. "They're pushing." The expedited hearing reduces your preparation time by 30 days. Davin will have less documentation to present. The odds shift. The odds were never great. Essie sat across from her. The apartment was quiet. The canyon wind pushed against the window. Through the glass, the port market was dark, the stalls closed, the cobblestone empty. "I can leave," Essie said. "Before the hearing, if I'm not in the port district, the case becomes moot. You lose nothing." Bridget looked at her. The amber light caught the gray in her hair, and the lines around her eyes, and the scars on her hands. "You're not a cost," she said. "I told you that on day one." "I'm being practical." "No, you're being scared, and that's fine, but you're not leaving." It was not an order. It was not a demand. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same flat certainty with which Bridget stated everything. The grain soaks for 40 minutes. The burner starts at low heat. You're not leaving. As if these were all equivalent truths, all part of the same operational manual for how the world worked when Bridget Core was running it. Day 53. Essie found the file. She was cleaning the storage unit under the counter, a weekly task that involved removing, sorting, and restacking the supplies that accumulated in the stall's limited space, when her hand closed on a folder tucked behind the bulk grain containers. It was a paper folder, which was unusual. Almost everything in the port ran on digital records. She opened it. Inside were 3 sets of documents. Each set contained a provisional guardianship affidavit, a colonial affairs review decision, and a permanent residency waiver. 3 children, 3 cases. 3 times Bridget Kaur had filed paperwork under Article 14, Section 3, and 3 times Colonial Affairs had granted permanent status. The dates spanned 8 years. The first case was 11 years old, filed within months of Bridget's arrival at the port. Essie read the file slowly. The names: Vel and Tessam Chelisi siblings, ages 9 and 7 at the time of filing. Roar Dranathi male, age 12. Each file contained the same documentation Davin had described: guardian identification, minor identification, educational records, medical checkups, proof of care. Each file told the same story in the dry, procedural language of bureaucratic forms. A child arrived. A woman signed her name. The system tried to take the child back. The woman held the line. The Chelisi siblings ran a repair shop on the lower level. The Dranathi was an apprentice mechanic on a freight crew. Bridget had told her this on day 1. In plain language, without drama, without framing it as heroism or sacrifice. 3 children, 11 years, a soup stall that was marginally profitable on the best days. Essie replaced the folder. She restacked the supplies. She did not mention it. Day 60, the hearing. Colonial Affairs hearing room. A plain space with a long table, chairs, a recording unit, and a window that faced the canyon. Davin Reese sat at one end. The Seathrani legal representative sat at the other, a different Seathrani, female this time, with the precise diction and controlled manner of someone who argued cases for a living. Bridget sat in the middle, in her clean apron, with the folder of documentation beside her. Essie sat next to Bridget. She had dressed in the clothes Bridget had bought her on day 14. A simple tunic, clean, the right size, unremarkable. Her hair had grown in the weeks since the intake facility's barber, white, fine, beginning to curl at the ends the way Deshani hair did when it was not being cut by institutional scissors. Her ears were up. She was listening to everything. The Seathrani representative presented the compacts case. The minor was an unclaimed asset under Tesseran law. The compacts authority superseded local charter provisions. The provisional guardianship was a procedural delay rather than a substantive claim, and the minor should be returned to the labor redistribution pool. Davin presented the defense. Article 14, Section 3, was valid charter law predating the compact. The guardianship met all procedural requirements. The minor was receiving documented care including nutrition, housing, medical attention, and education. And the compact's expedited review request did not alter the legal validity of the 90-day protection period. Then Bridget spoke. She did not give a speech. She produced documentation, 53 days of records, meal logs, every meal Essie had eaten, dated and itemized, because Bridget had been tracking it since day 1. Educational reports from Thorne, including assessment scores that showed Essie performing at advanced levels in mathematics and logistics. Medical records from the port clinic showing improved nutrition markers, healthy weight gain, and the healed foot wound. A signed statement from Davin confirming Bridget's 11-year residency and tax record. 3 letters from Port District residents, Kess the dock worker, a shuttle pilot named Garin, and Thorne the teacher, each stating that the minor known as Essie Kaur was a visible, cared-for member of the port community. 53 days of proof that a cook had been paying attention. The Seathrani representative looked at the documentation. She did not argue it. The numbers were clean, the records were complete, and the law, the specific, procedural, unglamorous law of a port district charter written 40 years before the compact existed, was clear. We will recommend that the expedited review be denied and the standard 90-day period be honored in full, Davin said, pending permanent status review at the appropriate time. The Sithrani representative closed her file. The compact reserves the right to appeal. The compact always reserves the right to appeal, Davin said, and I always reserve the right to drown them in paperwork. We understand each other. The hearing ended. They walked back to the market. The stalls were running, it was midday, the lunch rush building, and Bridget stepped behind the counter and tied on her apron and began serving soup as if she had not just spent 2 hours in a hearing room defending a child's right to exist. Essie stood in the stall entrance. The market noise washed over her, traders, dock workers, the hiss of steam, the clatter of bowls. Bridget worked the counter with the same steady hands, the same efficient movements, the same grounded, unhurried competence that she brought to everything. You logged every meal, Essie said. I logged my inventory. You're part of my inventory. That's not why you did it. Bridget looked at her, the briefest pause in the rhythm of ladle and bowl. No, she said, that's not why I did it. Essie walked behind the counter. She washed her hands in the sanitization basin. She tied on the smaller apron Bridget had bought her on day 10. She checked the secondary vat's temperature, 2 degrees low. She adjusted the burner. She pulled the grain crate into position and began sorting. The market ran. The soup was hot. The cobblestone was warm in the midday sun. Through the stall's front opening, Essie could see the upper promenade where the Colonial Affairs office sat, and beyond it the canyon wall, and beyond that a sky so wide and deep and full of light that counting the stars in it would take a lifetime. She had 90 days. She had a stall. She had a name on a form and a blanket on a cot and a woman who logged every meal because the documentation was the love, and the love was the documentation, and both of them would hold. Essie sorted grain. Her hands were steady.